Picture this. It's your wedding day. You're standing at the altar in front of 200 guests, including senators in Boston's elite. The man you love looks into your eyes as the priest asks him to say, "I do." And instead he says, "I can't." But that's not the worst part. He then declares his love for another woman who walks down the aisle in a blood-red dress to claim him. Your humiliation is broadcast live. Your tech empire worth $200 million crumbles overnight. And your immigrant father dies from the stress of watching his daughter's American dream become a nightmare. Maya Rodriguez Chen thought she'd lost everything when Victoria Blackwood orchestrated the most devastating public betrayal in Boston's history. But Maya had no idea this was just the beginning of a war that would cost lives, destroy families, and expose a conspiracy that threatened the very foundation of the American dream itself. This is the story of how a construction worker's daughter took on Boston's elite and won, but the price she paid will shock you to your core. Maya Rodriguez Chen stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of her Boston penthouse office, watching the morning sun paint the harbor gold. At 28, she had already graced the cover of Forbes 30 Under 30, her tech startup ConnectCare valued at $200 million. The elderly care platform she had built from her cramped childhood bedroom now employed 300 people and served over 50,000 families across New England. Her reflection in the glass showed a woman transformed by success, but not hardened by it. Maya still carried herself with the quiet determination her father Carlos had instilled in her, the same focus that had driven her through MIT on a full scholarship and Harvard Business School as one of only 12 Latina students in her class. Connect Care had started as a simple idea born from tragedy. Her grandmother Elena, who had raised Maya while her parents worked double shifts, had fallen in her empty apartment and lain there for 6 hours before Maya found her. That night in the hospital, holding her grandmother's weathered hand, Maya had promised to build something that would ensure no elderly person would ever feel forgotten or alone again. The technology was elegant in its simplicity, a comprehensive platform that connected elderly clients with healthcare providers, family members, and emergency services through wearable devices, smartphone apps, and smart home integration. When Mrs. Patterson in Beacon Hill forgot to take her medication, the system alerted her daughter in California and her doctor in Boston simultaneously. When Mr. Kowalski in Dorchester fell in his bathroom, emergency responders were at his door within 4 minutes. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from Jackson Sterling, her fiancé of 2 years. "Can't wait to marry you tomorrow, beautiful. You've made all my dreams come true." She smiled, touching the simple engagement ring he had given her. Unlike the massive diamonds favored by Boston's old money families, this ring represented something real. Jackson had chosen it himself, he said, because it reminded him of her authenticity in a world full of pretense. "Miss Rodriguez Chen?" Her assistant knocked softly. "The final head count for tomorrow is confirmed. 200 guests, including the governor and 3 senators. The media coordinator says Boston Magazine wants an exclusive on the reception." Maya nodded, still gazing out at the water. Tomorrow would mark more than just her wedding to Jackson Sterling, heir to one of Boston's most prestigious banking families. It would represent the merging of 2 worlds, his legacy of old money respectability and her vision of technology serving humanity's most vulnerable. She had met Jackson 3 years ago at a venture capital conference where she was pitching ConnectCare's Series A round. While other investors peppered her with skeptical questions about market penetration and profit margins, Jackson had asked something different. "How did you know this was the problem worth solving?" The answer had poured out of her. Her grandmother Elena, the woman who had taught her to read before kindergarten and to code before high school, had been everything to Maya during her childhood. When Elena fell and lay helpless for hours, Maya realized that millions of elderly Americans face the same vulnerability every day. The terrifying prospect of being alone in their moment of greatest need. Jackson had listened with tears in his eyes. 3 weeks later, Sterling Capital led her Series A round with a $12 million investment. 6 months after that, Jackson had asked her to dinner, confessing that he had been thinking about her answer to his question ever since that day. Their courtship had been a fairy tale that even Maya's naturally skeptical nature couldn't resist. Jackson introduced her to Boston's elite circles, where her story of immigrant success captivated even the most skeptical socialites. Maya brought Jackson into her world of late-night coding sessions and visits to assisted living facilities, where residents treated him like the grandson they had always wanted. They complemented each other perfectly, his connections opening doors, her innovation creating solutions. When Maya needed regulatory approval for Connect Care's medical monitoring features, Jackson's family connections with the Massachusetts Medical Board smoothed the process. When Jackson wanted to understand emerging technology trends for Sterling Capital's investment strategy, Maya's network of MIT entrepreneurs provided insights that helped the firm identify the next generation of successful startups. Maya, the rehearsal dinner starts in 3 hours, her sister Diane called from the doorway. At 24, Diane was in her final year at Harvard Medical School, following the path their father Carlos had dreamed of, but never had the opportunity to pursue himself. Diane looked stunning in the bridesmaid dress Maya had chosen, a soft lavender that complemented her darker complexion and brought out the intelligence in her dark eyes. She was everything Maya admired, brilliant, compassionate, and determined to use her medical degree to serve underserved communities in Boston's Latino neighborhoods. "I'm ready," Maya said, finally turning from the window. "Is Papa nervous about his speech tonight?" Diane grinned. "He's been practicing in the mirror for weeks. Yesterday, I caught him crying while he read it. He keeps saying he can't believe his little girl, who used to code games on his old laptop, is now marrying into the Sterling family." Maya's heart swelled thinking of her father. Carlos Rodriguez had arrived in Boston from Guatemala with nothing but a toolbox and determination. For 30 years, he had poured concrete and framed houses, saving every possible dollar for his daughter's education. His hands were permanently stained with cement dust and scarred from decades of construction work, but they had built the foundation for everything Maya had achieved. When Maya had started Connect Care, Carlos had insisted on being her first investor, writing a check for $5,000 from his retirement fund. "The Sterlings have money," he had told her, "but you have something better. You have purpose. Ah, fun." The irony wasn't lost on Maya that her father, who had spent his life building other people's houses, would watch his daughter marry into a family that owned half the buildings in downtown Boston. But Carlos had raised his daughters to believe that worth was measured by contribution, not inheritance. "He's been telling everyone at the construction site about the wedding," Diane continued. "Mrs. Vasquez next door says he showed her the invitation 20 times. He's so proud, Maya. We all are." Maya felt tears threatening her carefully applied makeup. The path from her childhood bedroom in East Boston to this penthouse office overlooking the harbor had been longer and harder than anyone knew. Scholarship applications, part-time jobs, late nights coding while her classmates partied. The constant awareness that she had to work twice as hard to achieve half the recognition of her privileged peers. But standing here now with her company thriving and her wedding to Jackson tomorrow, Maya felt like she had finally reached the summit of a mountain she had been climbing her entire life. The girl who had learned to code on her father's secondhand laptop was about to become Mrs. Jackson Sterling, joining one of Boston's most influential families while leading a company that was revolutionizing elder care across the country. As Maya prepared to leave for the rehearsal dinner, she caught her reflection in the office window. The young woman staring back bore little resemblance to the shy teenager who had learned advanced programming languages in the public library because her high school didn't offer computer science classes. Success had given her confidence, love had given her joy, and tomorrow would give her everything she had ever dreamed of. She had no idea that in less than 24 hours, that same reflection would show her a woman whose world had been completely destroyed. She had no idea that Jackson Sterling, the man she trusted with her heart and her future, was about to commit the most devastating betrayal imaginable. And she certainly had no idea that watching from the shadows was Victoria Blackwood, a woman who had spent the last 2 years planning Maya's total destruction. But for now, in this golden moment before the storm, Maya Rodriguez Chen was simply a woman in love, preparing to marry her prince and live happily ever after. Tomorrow would teach her that fairy tales don't exist in the real world, but today she still believed in happy endings. The sun was setting over Boston Harbor as Maya locked her office and headed toward what she believed would be the beginning of her perfect life. She had worked so hard, sacrificed so much, and overcome so many obstacles to reach this moment. Tomorrow, all of that struggle would finally be rewarded with the ultimate prize, true love and acceptance into the world she had always admired from the outside. Tomorrow would teach her that some prizes come with prices too high to pay, and that the people who seem most trustworthy could be the most dangerous of all. The rehearsal dinner at the Union Club was everything Maya had imagined and more. Soft candlelight danced across mahogany walls lined with portraits of Boston's founding families, men who had shaped the city's destiny when it was still a colonial outpost. Jackson's mother, Patricia Sterling, had outdone herself with the arrangements, transforming the private dining room into something from a Condé Nast magazine spread. Maya wore a simple navy dress that Jackson had picked out, saying it brought out her eyes and complemented her skin tone. She watched him work the room with effortless charm, telling stories about their relationship that made even the stuffiest board members laugh. His father, Richard Sterling, had flown in from London specifically for the wedding, cutting short a business trip to ensure he could walk his only son down the aisle. The guest list read like a who's who of Boston's power elite: senators, judges, university presidents, and CEOs whose decisions shaped the economic life of New England. These were people Maya had read about in business magazines, whose names appeared regularly in the society pages, whose children attended the same exclusive prep schools where admission was determined more by legacy than merit. Yet tonight, they were treating Maya like family. Senator Catherine Walsh, a Harvard Law graduate who had been Jackson's mother's roommate decades earlier, spent 20 minutes discussing Maya's plans to expand Connect Care into rural communities. Judge Robert Chen, no relation despite sharing Maya's adoptive surname, praised her work ethically integrating artificial intelligence into healthcare decision-making. "Maya, dear," Patricia Sterling approached with a champagne flute and a warm smile, "I want you to know how happy you've made Jackson. I've never seen him so focused, so purposeful. You've brought out the best in him." Patricia Sterling was everything Maya had expected from Boston's social register: elegant, educated, and effortlessly gracious. She had welcomed Maya into the family with genuine warmth, never once making her feel like an outsider, despite their vastly different backgrounds. "Thank you, Mrs. Sterling. Jackson has brought out the best in me, too. Please call me Patricia. After tomorrow, we'll be family." Patricia squeezed Maya's hand. "I know this world can be intimidating for someone not born into it, but you belong here, Maya. You've earned your place through talent and hard work, which is more than most of us can say." The comment was delivered with such sincerity that Maya felt her last lingering doubts about fitting into Jackson's world disappear. These people weren't the snobs she had imagined. They were simply successful individuals who had built something valuable and were now welcoming her into their circle. But it was her father's speech that brought tears to every eye in the room. Carlos Rodriguez stood slowly, his weathered hands trembling slightly as he unfolded a piece of paper. He had dressed carefully for tonight in the new suit Maya had bought him, and his silver hair was neatly combed. But nothing could hide the fact that he was a working man among aristocrats, his hands bearing the permanent stains and scars of 30 years in construction. 32 years ago, I came to this country with dreams bigger than my wallet. He began, his accent thick with emotion, but his English clear and precise. I wanted my daughters to have opportunities I never had. When Maya was 7 years old, she told me she was going to build something that would help people. I thought she meant with blocks. Gentle laughter rippled through the room, and Maya saw Jackson's eyes filling with tears as he listened to her father's words. But my Maya, she builds with code and compassion. She builds with determination and dreams. She sees problems where others see inconveniences, and she creates solutions where others make excuses. Tomorrow, she marries into a family that has shaped this city for generations. But Jackson Sterling, you are the lucky one. You are getting a woman who sees problems and creates solutions, who leads with her heart and succeeds with her mind. Carlos's voice broke slightly as he continued. In Guatemala, I learned that a man's worth is measured not by what he inherits, but by what he builds with his own hands. In America, I learned that dreams are not enough without the courage to pursue them. Maya, mi corazón, you have shown both courage and compassion. You have made your old papa so proud. He looked directly at Jackson, his voice gaining strength. Jackson, you treat her like the treasure she is, or you answer to me. The room erupted in applause and laughter. Jackson stood, embracing Carlos warmly. Sir, she's safe with me. I promise you that. Maya felt overwhelmed by the warmth and acceptance surrounding her. This was her family now, Not just Jackson, but this entire community of successful, influential people who had welcomed her based on her achievements and character rather than her pedigree. Later, as the evening wound down, Maya stepped onto the club's terrace for air. The September night was perfect, crisp but not cold, with Boston's skyline twinkling beyond the harbor. The city looked different from this height, less intimidating and more welcoming than it had seemed when she was a scholarship student struggling to fit in at MIT. Jackson joined her, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind. He smelled like expensive cologne and champagne, like success and privilege and everything Maya had worked so hard to achieve. Tomorrow, he whispered against her ear, we start forever. Are you nervous? Maya asked, leaning back against his chest. About marrying you? Never. About giving a speech in front of 200 people, including 3 senators and the governor? Terrified. Maya laughed, turning in his arms to face him. You'll be perfect. You always are. Something flickered across Jackson's face, too quick for Maya to interpret. For just a moment, his expression seemed troubled, almost guilty. But then he smiled and Maya convinced herself she had imagined it. Maya, I need to tell you something. Her heart skipped. What is it? Jackson hesitated, opening his mouth as if to speak, then closing it again. He looked out over the harbor, his jaw working as if he was struggling with some internal conflict. Jackson, what's wrong? He turned back to her, and for a moment Maya saw something in his eyes that looked almost like desperation. Just that I love you, more than I've ever loved anyone. I love you too, Maya said, but something in his tone sent a small chill down her spine. Are you sure you're okay? I'm perfect, Jackson said, but his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Everything is perfect. Across the terrace, neither of them noticed the figure watching from the shadows of the club's garden. Victoria Blackwood had been planning this moment for 2 years, ever since Jackson had chosen Maya Rodriguez Chen over her. Victoria, who had dated Jackson through their final year at Harvard Business School. Victoria, who had expected a proposal that never came. Victoria, who had watched from afar as Jackson fell in love with someone else. But Victoria Blackwood was not a woman who accepted defeat gracefully. She was a woman who planned, who calculated, who waited for the perfect moment to strike. And tomorrow at the altar of St. Paul's Cathedral, with Boston's elite watching and cameras rolling, she would execute the most devastating revenge she had ever conceived. Victoria smiled in the darkness, checking her phone one final time. Everything was in place. The research report exposing ConnectCare's fabricated safety issues would publish Monday morning. The short positions in Maya's company stock were established through shell companies that couldn't be traced back to her. The doctored communications that would destroy Maya's credibility were ready to release to regulatory authorities. But the masterstroke would happen first. Tomorrow, Jackson Sterling would stop mid-vow and confess his affair with Victoria. He would claim he could no longer live a lie, that he had realized Victoria was his true love all along. Maya would be humiliated in front of everyone who mattered in her professional and personal life. Jackson had no idea, of course. Victoria had spent months manipulating him, playing on his insecurities about Maya's success, convincing him that Maya saw him as just another investor rather than a true partner. She had been patient, strategic, and utterly ruthless in exploiting his deepest fears about being overshadowed by his brilliant fiancé. The psychological manipulation had been exquisite. Victoria had convinced Jackson that Maya's love was conditional on his family's wealth and connections, that she would never have chosen him if he were just another Harvard MBA working at a mid-tier investment bank. She had planted seeds of doubt about Maya's authenticity, suggesting that the immigrant success story was carefully calculated to appeal to wealthy liberal guilt. Most devastatingly, Victoria had convinced Jackson that Maya's refusal to take his surname professionally was evidence that she was using him for social advancement while maintaining her independence for when someone better came along. She had twisted Maya's feminist principles into evidence of opportunism, her ambition into proof of selfishness. Tomorrow, Maya Rodriguez Chen would learn that in the game of power and privilege, success made you a target, love made you vulnerable, and trust could be weaponized by those who understood how to exploit it. She would discover that the fairy tale she thought she was living was actually a carefully constructed nightmare designed to destroy everything she had built. As Maya and Jackson headed inside, planning to spend their last night apart before becoming husband and wife, Victoria Blackwood was already celebrating her victory. She had no idea that Maya's father had spent years learning to recognize wolves in sheep's clothing. She had no idea that Carlos Rodriguez had been quietly documenting everything, preparing for the war he sensed was coming. The stage was set for a battle that would destroy everything Maya had built, but would ultimately forge her into something stronger than she had ever imagined possible. Tomorrow would be the beginning of the end of Maya's innocence, but also the first day of her real education in how power actually worked in America. The rehearsal dinner was ending, but the real performance would begin in 12 hours at St. Paul's Cathedral, where Maya Rodriguez Chen would learn that some love stories are actually revenge tragedies in disguise. St. Paul's Cathedral had never looked more magnificent. White roses and baby's breath cascaded from every pew, their fragrance mixing with the scent of burning candles and polished wood. The morning light streaming through stained glass windows painted everything in jewel tones. Ruby red, sapphire blue, emerald green dancing across the marble floors and wooden pews. Maya stood in the bridal suite, her hands trembling as Diane fastened the pearl buttons on her grandmother's vintage wedding dress. The gown was a masterpiece of 1950s craftsmanship, passed down through 3 generations of Rodriguez women. Elena had worn it when she married Maya's grandfather in Guatemala City. Maya's mother had worn it for her Boston courthouse wedding to Carlos. Now Maya would wear it to marry into one of Boston's most prestigious families. "You look like a princess," Diane whispered, tears threatening her carefully applied makeup. Maya's reflection in the antique mirror showed a woman transformed by love and success. The dress, which had belonged to her grandmother Elena, fit perfectly after months of careful alterations by the same seamstress who had maintained the Sterling family's formal wear for 3 decades. Her dark hair was swept into an elegant chignon, decorated with her mother's pearl pins. And her only jewelry was the simple pearl necklace Carlos had given her for her college graduation. "Papa's been crying all morning," Diane reported, adjusting Maya's cathedral-length veil. "He keeps saying he can't believe his little girl is becoming Mrs. Sterling." The bridal suite buzzed with activity as Maya's wedding party made final preparations. Her maid of honor, Sarah Kim from Connect Care, was helping the flower girl practice walking in her miniature version of the bridesmaids' dresses. Maya's college roommate from MIT was touching up lipstick while Jackson's cousin adjusted her bouquet. A knock interrupted the feminine chatter. Maya's wedding coordinator, an elegant woman named Catherine who had organized society weddings for 20 years, peeked in with her signature calm efficiency. "It's time, Maya. The processional music is starting." Maya took a deep breath, gathering her bouquet of white peonies and eucalyptus. The flowers had been Jackson's choice, selected because they reminded him of the garden where he had proposed 6 months earlier. As she walked toward the cathedral's main doors, she could hear the organ playing Bach's Jesu, Joy of Man's Desiring, the same piece that had played at his parents' wedding 30 years ago. The cathedral's main hall was breathtaking. 200 guests rose to their feet as Maya appeared at the top of the aisle, their faces turning toward her in a sea of smiles and anticipation. Maya saw Jackson waiting at the altar, devastatingly handsome in his custom tuxedo, his dark hair perfectly styled, and his blue eyes bright with what she interpreted as love and excitement. His best man, Thomas Morrison, stood beside him looking appropriately solemn for the occasion. The officiant, Reverend Matthews, who had baptized Jackson as a baby and confirmed him at 13, smiled warmly as Maya began her walk down the aisle. Carlos appeared at her side, looking distinguished in the new suit Maya had bought him. His silver hair was perfectly combed, and his weathered hands were steady as he offered her his arm. For a man who had spent 30 years working with his hands, he carried himself with surprising dignity in this cathedral of privilege. "Ready, mi amor?" he whispered in Spanish. "Ready, papa." The walk down the aisle felt like floating through a dream. Maya saw her colleagues from Connect Care beaming in the front rows, their faces filled with pride for their brilliant CEO. She saw Patricia Sterling dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief, overwhelmed with emotion at watching her only son marry the woman who had captured his heart. She saw the governor and 3 senators, venture capitalists who had funded her company's growth, and journalists who would write about Boston's wedding of the year. These were people whose approval she had sought her entire professional life, and now they were celebrating her personal happiness as much as her business success. When Carlos placed her hand in Jackson's, he whispered something in Spanish that made Maya smile. Be happy, mi niña. You deserve all the joy in the world. Jackson looked into her eyes, and for a moment, everything felt perfect. This was the culmination of everything she had worked for. Love, success, acceptance, and the promise of a future where she would never again feel like an outsider looking in. Reverend Matthews began the ceremony with readings about love and commitment, speaking about the sacred bond between two souls choosing to unite their destinies. Maya barely heard the words, lost in Jackson's gaze and the overwhelming sense that she was exactly where she belonged. The ceremony proceeded flawlessly through the opening prayers and readings. Jackson's college roommate delivered a touching reading from Corinthians about love being patient and kind. Diane read a poem about two hearts becoming one. The cathedral's acoustics carried every word clearly to the assembled guests. Dearly beloved, Reverend Matthews intoned, his voice echoing in the sacred space. We are gathered here today to witness the union of Jackson Alexander Sterling and Maya Elena Rodriguez Chen in holy matrimony. Holier. Maya felt her heart soaring as the Reverend spoke about the sacred nature of marriage, the commitment they were making not just to each other, but to their communities and families. This was the moment she had dreamed of since childhood, marrying her best friend in front of everyone who mattered to them. Do you, Jackson Alexander Sterling, Reverend Matthews began, take Maya Elena Rodriguez Chen to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold in sickness and in health, for richer and for poorer, for better and for worse, till death do you part? The cathedral fell silent. Maya smiled expectantly, waiting for Jackson's, I do. The pause stretched longer than normal, and Maya felt the first flutter of concern. Jackson was looking at her, but his expression was strange, conflicted. Instead of the joyful, I do she expected, Jackson's face crumpled. He stepped back from her, shaking his head. I can't, he said, his voice carrying in the perfect acoustics of the cathedral. I'm sorry, Maya. I can't do this. The silence that followed was deafening. Maya felt the blood drain from her face as 200 guests registered what was happening. Camera phones began rising as journalists realized they were witnessing a scandal that would dominate headlines for weeks. Jackson, what are you saying? Maya whispered, her voice barely audible. I've been living a lie, Jackson said, his voice stronger now, carrying to every corner of the cathedral. Maya, you're an incredible woman, but I've realized I'm not in love with you. I'm in love with someone else. Gas echoed through the cathedral like a wave. Maya heard her father's sharp intake of breath behind her, felt Diane's hand reach out to steady her. The bouquet in her hands suddenly felt impossibly heavy, and she struggled to process what was happening. Who? Maya whispered, though part of her already knew. Victoria Blackwood stood up from a pew near the back, stunning in a blood-red dress that violated every wedding etiquette rule ever written. She walked down the aisle with predatory grace, her designer heels clicking on the marble floor like a countdown to destruction. Maya watched in horror as the woman she had never considered a threat approached the altar. Victoria was everything Maya wasn't. Old money elegant, Harvard connected, born into the world that Maya had worked so hard to enter. She moved through the cathedral like she owned it, which Maya realized with sickening clarity she probably did through family connections and donations. Jackson's been in love with me for months, Victoria announced, her voice carrying clearly through the cathedral's acoustics. We've been trying to fight it, but love can't be denied. Maya watched in horror as Victoria reached the altar and took Jackson's hand possessively. The gesture was deliberate, calculated to inflict maximum humiliation in front of Boston's most influential people. I'm sorry it happened this way, Maya, Victoria said, not sounding sorry at all. But Jackson deserves to be with someone who truly understands his world. The implication was clear and devastatingly cruel. Maya, the immigrant's daughter, the scholarship kid who had clawed her way to success, would never truly belong in Jackson's rarefied world of old money and inherited privilege. She was an outsider playing dress-up, and everyone in the cathedral now knew it. Maya stood frozen, her bouquet trembling in her hands. She could hear whispers spreading through the congregation like wildfire, could see camera phones recording every second of her humiliation. The story would be online within minutes. Tech mogul left at altar by banking heir. Her personal devastation would become public entertainment. Then she heard her father's voice, quiet but firm. Maya, hold your head up. Walk out with dignity. Carlos Rodriguez had spent 30 years working for men like Jackson Sterling, building their houses, pouring their driveways, accepting their casual condescension with patient dignity. He recognized what was happening. His daughter was being publicly humiliated, not just as a woman, but as an outsider who had dared to reach above her station. Maya looked at Jackson one last time. The man she had loved, trusted, and planned to build a life with looked back at her with something that might have been regret, but no remorse. Victoria clung to his arm possessively, a triumphant smile playing at her lips as she surveyed the destruction she had orchestrated. Without a word, Maya turned around. Her father offered his arm, and together they walked back down the aisle that minutes earlier had represented the path to her dreams. Every step echoed in the terrible silence, each footfall marking the death of the fairy tale she had believed in. As they reached the cathedral doors, Maya heard Jackson's voice behind her. Maya, I hope someday you'll understand. She didn't turn around. She didn't respond. She walked out of St. Paul's Cathedral and into a world where everything she had believed about love, trust, and human decency had just been revealed as an illusion. Outside, reporters were already gathering like vultures drawn to carrion. Miss Rodriguez Chen, how do you feel about being left at the altar? One shouted. Any comment on the affair? Called another. Carlos stepped protectively in front of his daughter. No questions, he said firmly, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had faced harder challenges than aggressive reporters. As they drove away in the car that should have taken them to the reception, Maya stared out the window at the Boston skyline that had once represented infinite possibility. Now it looked cold and hostile, filled with people who would spend the weekend gossiping about her humiliation over champagne and canapes. She had no idea that this was just the beginning. She had no idea that Victoria Blackwood's plan extended far beyond public embarrassment to the complete destruction of everything Maya had built. And she certainly had no idea that Monday morning would bring revelations that would make being left at the altar seem like a minor inconvenience compared to what was coming. The war for Maya's life had begun, and she didn't even know she was fighting. Monday morning brought no mercy. Maya had spent the weekend in her father's modest house in East Boston, away from reporters and social media, trying to process the devastation of Saturday's events. The small house where she had grown up felt like a refuge from the storm of public humiliation that had engulfed her life. Diane had stayed with her, making endless cups of tea and fielding calls from concerned friends and colleagues. Maya's phone had been buzzing constantly with messages of support, expressions of outrage at Jackson's behavior, and interview requests from journalists who wanted to capitalize on her pain. But nothing could have prepared Maya for what awaited her when she finally returned to Connect Care's offices Monday morning. Maya, thank God you're here, her chief technology officer, Sarah Kim, rushed toward her the moment she stepped off the elevator. Sarah's usually calm demeanor was replaced by barely controlled panic. We have a crisis, a major crisis. Maya's assistant handed her a tablet, displaying the morning's financial news. The headline made her blood freeze. Connect Care platform linked to multiple elder deaths. Internal documents reveal safety cover-up. The article, published simultaneously by TechCrunch, Bloomberg, and the Wall Street Journal, detailed allegations that Connect Care's monitoring system had failed to detect medical emergencies in at least 12 cases over the past 18 months, resulting in preventable deaths. It included what appeared to be internal emails discussing the company's decision to hide these failures from regulatory authorities and continue operating despite known safety flaws. Maya, these emails, Sarah said, her voice shaking as she pointed to the documents displayed on the tablet. They have your signature on them, but I swear on my mother's grave, I've never seen them before. This isn't real data from our systems. Maya scrolled through the documents, her hands trembling as she read email after email that appeared to show her authorizing cover-ups, dismissing safety concerns, and prioritizing profits over the lives of vulnerable elderly clients. The emails looked authentic, complete with Connect Care letterhead, proper formatting, and her digital signature. But the content was fabricated. Every single allegation was false. Maya had never authorized hiding safety data. Connect Care's entire mission was built on transparency and trust. The company's safety record was actually exemplary, with their platform preventing hundreds of medical emergencies and saving dozens of lives. Who published this? Maya demanded, though she already suspected the answer. The source is listed as anonymous, but the investigation was coordinated with Blackwood Capital's research division, her communications director reported grimly. They released a comprehensive research report this morning, recommending investors immediately sell ConnectCare stock and avoid the company's services. Victoria's venture capital firm. Maya felt sick as the full scope of the attack became clear. This wasn't just personal revenge for stealing Jackson. This was financial warfare designed to destroy her company and her reputation simultaneously, using sophisticated fraud to create the appearance of legitimate business concerns. Her phone rang constantly throughout the morning, investors demanding explanations for allegations they assumed were true, board members scheduling emergency meetings to discuss her leadership, regulatory authorities announcing investigations based on the fabricated evidence, reporters wanting statements about the deaths that had never actually occurred. ConnectCare's stock price, which had closed Friday at $48 per share after months of steady growth, opened Monday at $18 and was falling fast. Maya watched in real time as 2 years of careful relationship building and financial success evaporated before her eyes. Maya, her CFO, burst into the conference room where she was trying to coordinate a response. We just lost Mass General as a client. Their legal team says they can't risk association with us until this investigation concludes. 3 other hospital systems are suspending their contracts pending resolution. Within hours, Maya watched partnerships that had taken months to negotiate disappear with single phone calls. Organizations that had praised her vision last week now treated her like a pariah. The Massachusetts Attorney General's office announced they were opening a formal investigation into ConnectCare's safety protocols, lending official credibility to fabricated allegations. But the cruelest blow came when Maya tried to trace how Victoria had obtained seemingly authentic internal communications. Her head of security, a former FBI agent named Michael Torres, delivered the devastating news after spending the morning analyzing the leaked documents. Maya, the metadata on these documents suggests they originated from Jackson Sterling's personal laptop, Michael reported, his face grim. The digital signatures and email headers indicate he had administrative access to your secure servers. Someone with his login credentials created these documents using ConnectCare's own systems. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife. Jackson hadn't just humiliated her publicly. He had been feeding Victoria intelligence about ConnectCare's operations for months, giving her everything she needed to construct this elaborate fraud. The man Maya had trusted with her heart had also trusted him with her company's most sensitive information. Maya's assistant knocked softly on the conference room door. Maya, your father is here. He says it's urgent. Carlos Rodriguez entered the conference room, his face grave and his weathered hands clutching a newspaper Maya hadn't seen yet. The Boston Herald's afternoon edition. The headline read, "From Rags to Riches to Ruin, the Rise and Fall of Maya Rodriguez Chen." The article was a character assassination disguised as investigative journalism. It questioned Maya's credentials, suggesting her Harvard MBA was the result of affirmative action rather than merit. It implied that ConnectCare's early success was due to Jackson's connections rather than Maya's innovation. It painted her as an opportunist who had used a romantic relationship with Jackson to gain access to Boston's business elite, only to betray that trust through corporate fraud. Papa, this is all lies, Maya said, tears finally coming after a day of numbly processing one devastating blow after another. Carlos sat down heavily across from her, his face showing every one of his 62 years. I know, mi amor, but lies can be more powerful than truth when they're told by the right people to the right audience. As the day wore on, the damage multiplied exponentially. ConnectCare's stock closed at $12, wiping out 75% of the company's value in a single trading session. Maya's personal net worth, built primarily on her equity in the company, had essentially evaporated. More importantly, the platform that served 50,000 elderly clients across New England was in jeopardy as partners fled and funding dried up. The human cost was devastating. Maya received calls from families whose elderly relatives depended on ConnectCare services, asking whether their loved ones were safe. She had to explain that the safety allegations were false while knowing that many people would stop using the platform anyway. leaving vulnerable elderly people without the protection they needed. That evening, Maya sat alone in her penthouse office watching the sun set over Boston Harbor. The same view that had filled her with pride Saturday morning now mocked her with its indifferent beauty. The city below continued its daily rhythm, unaware that one of its most promising young entrepreneurs was watching her life's work crumble in real time. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is just the beginning. You took something that belonged to me. Now you'll learn what real loss feels like. V." Maya stared at Victoria's message, understanding for the first time that Saturday's wedding disaster had been merely the opening move in a much larger game. Victoria Blackwood wasn't just trying to humiliate her or steal Jackson. She was trying to erase Maya completely, to destroy not just her happiness, but her life's work and the platform that thousands of vulnerable people depended on. But Maya had inherited more than her father's work ethic and her grandmother's wedding dress. She had inherited Carlos Rodriguez's understanding that in America, success made you a target, and that fighting back required more than anger. It required strategy, patience, and the kind of determination that had carried her family across borders and through generations of struggle. The war was far from over. In fact, Maya was beginning to realize it was just beginning. Victoria had revealed her willingness to commit sophisticated fraud and destroy innocent people's lives for personal revenge. Maya needed to understand exactly who she was fighting and how far Victoria was willing to go. As night fell over Boston, Maya began planning her response. She had been caught off guard by the first attack, but she wouldn't make that mistake again. Victoria Blackwood had just taught her a valuable lesson about how power really worked in America. Now Maya would put that education to use. Tuesday brought news that made Monday's financial catastrophe seem like a minor setback. Maya was in her nearly empty office, most of her staff having been laid off overnight as Connect Care struggled to maintain operations, when Diane burst through the doors in tears. "Maya, you need to come to the hospital right now," Diane sobbed, her face streaked with mascara and her voice breaking. "It's Papa. He's had a heart attack." The drive to Massachusetts General Hospital passed in a blur of sirens and panic. Maya's mind couldn't process what Diane was telling her. Carlos Rodriguez, who had never missed a day of work in 30 years, who still played soccer with men half his age, who had seemed invincible despite his 62 years, was fighting for his life. Maya found her father in the cardiac intensive care unit, connected to machines that beeped and hummed with mechanical precision. His face was gray, his breathing labored, and his usually strong hands lay motionless on the white hospital sheets. The man who had built half of East Boston with those hands now looked fragile and small. "The doctor says it was massive," Diane whispered, clutching Maya's hand so tightly it hurt. "They're not sure if he'll make it through the night. Maya, what if we lose him? What if Papa dies thinking his daughter's a criminal?" Dr. Patricia Chen, no relation despite the shared surname, explained the situation in clinical terms that barely penetrated Maya's shock. "Your father's heart suffered severe damage. The stress of recent events appears to have triggered the attack. He was found collapsed in his living room with newspapers scattered around him. A neighbor heard him fall and called 911. Maya looked at the newspapers a nurse had collected from the scene. Every major Boston publication carried stories about Connect Care's alleged safety failures. The Boston Globe's headline read, "Local Family's American Dream Becomes Nightmare as Daughter's Company Faces Federal Investigation." The Herald had gone further. "Tech fraud, scandal rocks immigrant family. Father's sacrifice wasted on daughter's greed." As Maya held her father's hand, feeling how cold and fragile it was, a nurse quietly informed her that several reporters were waiting in the hospital lobby, hoping for a statement about Carlos's condition. Even her family's medical crisis had become part of the media circus surrounding her downfall. The irony was crushing. Carlos had worked himself nearly to death for 30 years to give his daughters opportunities he never had. Now the stress of watching Maya's success turn to scandal had literally broken his heart. "Maya," Carlos whispered, his voice barely audible above the machines. His eyes fluttered open, focusing on her face with effort. "I'm here, Papa. Don't try to talk. Promise me something," he continued, each word requiring tremendous effort. "Anything, Papa. Don't let them break you. Don't let them make you smaller than you are. Build something they can't destroy." Those were the last coherent words Carlos Rodriguez spoke to his daughter. He passed away at 4:30 a.m. Wednesday morning, surrounded by his girls but unable to see the vindication Maya would eventually achieve. His final moments were clouded by the belief that his daughter might be the criminal the newspapers said she was. Maya's grief was compounded by rage when she learned that Victoria Blackwood had issued a statement to the press expressing sympathy for the Rodriguez family, while noting that stress-related health issues often accompany financial impropriety investigations. The implication was clear and monstrous. Carlos had died from shame over his daughter's alleged crimes. The funeral was held Friday morning at Sacred Heart Church in East Boston, the same church where Carlos had prayed every Sunday for 30 years, lighting candles for his daughter's success and his wife's soul. Maya expected a small gathering of family and friends, but was shocked to find the church packed with construction workers, nurses, teachers, and other members of Boston's working-class Latino community. "Your father helped my family when no one else would," explained Mrs. Vasquez, Carlos's next-door neighbor. "When my husband was injured and couldn't work, Carlos brought us food every week and found my husband light duty until he healed." Similar stories emerged throughout the service. Carlos had quietly helped dozens of families over the years, paying medical bills, finding jobs for unemployed men, tutoring children who struggled in school. The man who had seemed focused solely on his daughter's success had actually been building an entire community of mutual support. But even this moment of community celebration was tainted by Victoria's vindictive reach. As Maya delivered her eulogy, praising her father's sacrifice and dignity, she noticed several people recording with their phones. Later that day, edited clips appeared on social media, with commentary suggesting Maya was exploiting her father's death for public sympathy in her fraud case. The final blow came when Maya returned home from the cemetery to find Diane waiting with devastating news. Harvard Medical School had expelled her, effective immediately. "They say there's evidence I cheated on my medical boards," Diane said, her voice hollow with disbelief. "Someone submitted a recording of me allegedly discussing exam questions with another student before the test. Maya, I've never cheated on anything in my life. You know that." Maya listened to the audio file Harvard had received. It was clearly Diane's voice, but the conversation had been fabricated using sophisticated audio editing technology. Victoria had not only targeted Maya, but had systematically destroyed her entire family, using the same kind of technological manipulation she had employed against Connect Care. "They're also revoking my scholarship retroactively," Diane continued, her voice breaking. "I owe Harvard $200,000 for tuition I can't pay. And Maya, there's more. I've been blacklisted from other medical schools. No one will take a transfer student with a cheating allegation in their file." Maya realized with horrifying clarity that Victoria's plan was more comprehensive than simple business competition or romantic revenge. She was systematically destroying every person Maya cared about, every dream the Rodriguez family had built through decades of sacrifice. The attack wasn't just personal, it was generational, designed to erase 30 years of progress and send the family back to the powerlessness Carlos had fought so hard to escape. That night, Maya sat alone in her father's empty house, surrounded by the debris of shattered dreams. Connect Care was in bankruptcy proceedings, its assets being liquidated to pay fabricated damages. Her personal assets were frozen pending the federal investigation. Her father was dead, killed by the stress of watching his daughter's reputation destroyed. Her sister's medical career was over before it had truly begun. The platform that had served thousands of elderly clients was offline, leaving vulnerable people without the safety net they depended on. Maya received heartbreaking calls from families asking why their loved ones' monitoring devices had stopped working, why the emergency response system was no longer available. She had to explain that their safety was being sacrificed to a rich woman's desire for revenge. Maya picked up her phone and scrolled through the news coverage of her downfall. The narrative was consistent across every outlet. Immigrant family reaches too high, falls too far, deserves what they got for trying to compete with their betters. The American dream revealed as a cruel illusion, another cautionary tale about people who didn't know their place. For the first time since childhood, Maya Rodriguez Chen felt truly powerless. Victoria Blackwood had succeeded in reducing her from a successful entrepreneur to a broken woman facing federal investigation for crimes she hadn't committed. The fairy tale was over, replaced by a nightmare that seemed to have no end. But as Maya sat in her father's chair, surrounded by photos documenting 30 years of honest work and family pride, she began to understand something Victoria hadn't anticipated. Carlos Rodriguez hadn't raised a daughter who surrendered when beaten down. He had raised a fighter who got stronger when cornered, who built solutions when faced with problems that seemed impossible to solve. Maya opened her laptop and began to type. If Victoria Blackwood wanted war, she would get it. But this battle would be fought on Maya's terms, using weapons Victoria had never encountered: truth, community, and the kind of determination that had carried the Rodriguez family across borders and through generations of struggle. The real fight was about to begin, and Maya was finally ready to stop playing defense. 3 months after her father's funeral, Maya thought she had found solid ground. Working from a cramped, shared office space in Cambridge, surviving on savings and cheap coffee, she had assembled a small team of former Connect Care employees who believed in her innocence and refused to abandon the mission they had started together. Maya's new lawyer, David Kim, was a former federal prosecutor who specialized in financial crimes and had a reputation for taking on impossible cases. He had agreed to represent Maya pro bono after reviewing the fabricated evidence against Connect Care and recognizing the sophisticated nature of Victoria's fraud. "Maya, we've got them," David announced during their weekly strategy meeting, his voice filled with the excitement of a prosecutor who had found the smoking gun. "My forensic accountants have traced the fake documents to a private intelligence firm called Meridian Solutions that Blackwood Capital has used for opposition research on at least 6 previous occasions. Sarah Kim, Maya's former CTO who had refused a lucrative offer from Google to help clear Maya's name, had been working around the clock to rebuild their technical case. The metadata analysis is conclusive," she reported. "The alleged safety failures never happened. The families mentioned in the reports, 3 of them don't exist and the others never used our services. We can prove everything was fabricated." Maya felt hope stirring for the first time in months, a dangerous emotion she had tried to suppress but couldn't quite extinguish. "What about the Massachusetts investigation?" "The Attorney General's office is ready to dismiss all charges once we present our evidence," David said confidently. 3 families whose loved ones allegedly died due to Connect Care failures have come forward to say their relatives are actually alive and well. The whole thing is going to collapse like a house of cards. Maya had been living in her father's house, subsisting on the kindness of neighbors who had known Carlos for decades and refused to believe his daughter was capable of the crimes she was accused of. Mrs. Vasquez next door brought her meals daily. Mr. Martinez offered to fix her car when she couldn't afford a mechanic. The community that had embraced Carlos Rodriguez as one of their own now protected his daughter with the same fierce loyalty. But Maya's greatest source of strength came from an unexpected ally. Marcus Washington, an investigative journalist with the Boston Globe, who had initially covered her downfall, but had grown increasingly suspicious of the evidence against her. Marcus was African American, the son of a single mother who had cleaned offices in downtown Boston while putting herself through nursing school at night. He understood what it looked like when working-class kids of color made it in Boston's elite circles. "Maya, your story doesn't add up as a villain narrative," Marcus had told her during their first meeting at a coffee shop in Roxbury. "I know what it looks like when people like us actually make it in this city. They don't throw it away on stupid schemes. They protect what they built because they know how hard it was to get there." Marcus had been quietly investigating Victoria Blackwood and Blackwood Capital for months, uncovering a pattern of similar attacks against other entrepreneurs who had threatened established interests. His expose was scheduled to run Sunday morning, just as Maya's legal team presented their evidence to federal prosecutors. "This is bigger than personal revenge," Marcus explained Friday evening as Maya's team gathered for a final strategy session in David's law office. "Victoria has been using this playbook against minority entrepreneurs across New England for 5 years. You're just the highest profile victim because of the wedding scandal." Maya reviewed the draft article on Marcus's laptop, her heart racing as she read his meticulously documented investigation. It was devastating, laying out Victoria's entire operation. The shell companies used to hide her activities, The network of corrupt journalists who published her fabricated stories, the private investigators who manufactured evidence against her targets. Sunday morning, this publishes, Marcus said, his voice filled with righteous anger. Monday morning, the feds arrest Victoria and Jackson. Tuesday, you're vindicated and Connect Care is back online serving the people who need it most. David nodded confidently. We've coordinated with the Justice Department. They're ready to move the moment Marcus's story breaks. Victoria's been too arrogant, left too many traces. She thought her money and connections made her untouchable. Maya felt tears in her eyes as she imagined the comeback that was just 72 hours away. What about the clients we lost? The elderly people who depended on our platform. We're partnering with the city to restore service immediately, Sarah said. The technology is solid. It was always solid. We just need to get past Victoria's lies and rebuild trust with our users. That night, Maya allowed herself to imagine a future beyond survival. Connect Care could be rebuilt stronger than before, with new safeguards against the kind of attacks Victoria had launched. Diane would be reinstated at Harvard with a formal apology and could finish medical school. The Rodriguez family name would be restored, and Carlos's sacrifice would be vindicated. Maya fell asleep in her father's chair, his journal in her lap, dreaming of the vindication that was just days away. For the first time since the wedding disaster, she felt like the nightmare might actually be ending. She woke up Saturday morning to her phone ringing frantically. It was David, his voice tight with panic that immediately jolted Maya fully awake. Maya, we have a major problem. Marcus Washington was found dead in his apartment this morning. Apparent suicide. He left a note confessing to fabricating evidence against Victoria Blackwood and claiming he was being blackmailed to write false stories. Maya's blood went cold as the words penetrated her consciousness. That's impossible. Marcus would never commit suicide. He was about to expose everything. I know, David interrupted, his voice grim. But the note is in his handwriting. His laptop is missing, along with all his research files and backup drives. Maya, the story was scheduled to auto-publish this morning. Instead, the Globe ran a retraction, claiming their investigation found no evidence of wrongdoing by Blackwood Capital. Maya sat in stunned silence as David continued delivering devastating news that destroyed everything they had built over 3 months of careful preparation. It gets worse. Meridian Solutions, the private intelligence firm that created the fake documents, they dissolved overnight. All employees have disappeared. The offices are empty, and the corporate records have been sealed by a federal court order. Our forensic evidence just became Heiress support without any way to verify the source. Sarah's voice came through speakerphone, barely a whisper. Maya, the Massachusetts Attorney General's office just called. They're proceeding with criminal charges against Connect Care. Someone provided them with new evidence overnight. They say it's ironclad and proves our innocence claims were fraudulent. Maya realized with horrifying clarity that Victoria Blackwood was not just wealthy and connected. She was willing to commit murder to protect her scheme, and she had the resources to make it look completely convincing. Marcus Washington had died because he had tried to help Maya seek justice. The phone rang again. This time it was Diane, sobbing hysterically. Maya, the FBI just raided my apartment. They say I was part of Connect Care's safety cover-up conspiracy. Harvard has permanently expelled me and filed criminal charges for academic fraud. They have new evidence that I was working with you to hide the deaths. As Maya processed the complete collapse of her legal strategy, her phone buzzed with a text from the same unknown number that had contacted her months earlier. Did you really think it would be that easy? Some games are rigged from the start. Next time, know your place. V. Maya stared at the message, understanding that Victoria had been toying with her for months. The hope, the gathering evidence, the promise of vindication, it had all been an elaborate psychological torture designed to make her eventual defeat even more devastating. Victoria had let Maya believe she could fight back, then crushed that hope more thoroughly than if she had never allowed it to exist. Marcus Washington was dead. Her legal case was destroyed. Her sister faced federal charges as a co-conspirator, and Victoria Blackwood had just demonstrated that she could kill with impunity and make it look like suicide, leaving no trace of evidence that could be used against her. Maya was trapped in a nightmare with no escape, facing an enemy with unlimited resources and absolutely no moral boundaries. The illusion of safety had been shattered completely, revealing the true depth of her powerlessness against the machine that was determined to destroy her. But even as despair threatened to overwhelm her, Maya remembered her father's final words. Build something they can't destroy. Victoria could murder journalists and fabricate evidence, but she had revealed something crucial about herself. She was terrified enough of the truth to kill for it, which meant the truth was still powerful enough to threaten her. Maya was about to learn that sometimes the only way forward is through the very center of hell itself. 6 months after her father's funeral, Maya Rodriguez Chen sat in the Suffolk County Courthouse watching her life officially end. The federal judge's voice echoed in the nearly empty courtroom as he read the verdict that would complete her destruction. Connect Care Technologies Incorporated is hereby ordered to cease all operations immediately and enter Chapter 7 bankruptcy liquidation, Judge William Morrison announced, his voice carrying the weight of legal finality. All assets will be seized to satisfy judgments against the company and its officers. Maya's public defender, an overworked and underpaid attorney named Robert Chen, who had been assigned her case when she could no longer afford private counsel, had done his best with an impossible situation. The fabricated evidence against Connect Care had been reinforced by new documents that appeared genuine enough to convince a jury of ordinary citizens who had no reason to doubt official-looking government reports. Maya's personal assets remained frozen pending resolution of criminal charges that could send her to prison for 20 years. The prosecution had painted her as a greedy entrepreneur who had prioritized profits over the lives of vulnerable elderly people, a narrative that resonated with jurors already suspicious of tech executives and their promises to change the world. Diane sat behind her in the courtroom's gallery, thin and hollow-eyed from months of legal stress and financial hardship. The federal investigation had destroyed her medical career completely, leaving her working double shifts at a diner in East Boston to pay legal fees that mounted daily. Harvard's lawsuit for academic fraud had resulted in a judgment that would follow her for the rest of her life. Maya Rodriguez Chen, Judge Morrison continued, you are hereby ordered to pay restitution in the amount of $50 million to affected families and regulatory authorities for damages caused by your company's negligent safety practices. $50 million Maya didn't have, for crimes she hadn't committed, to victims who didn't exist. Victoria Blackwood had created the perfect legal destruction, impossible to prove innocence against fabricated evidence, impossible to pay the judgment without assets that had been seized, impossible to rebuild without resources or reputation. Outside the courthouse, Maya walked past a small group of protesters holding signs reading, Justice for Connect Care Victims and Corporate Criminals Must Pay. These were real people, paid by Victoria's public relations firm to protest against fabricated crimes, but their anger was genuine because they believed the lies they had been told about elderly people dying due to Maya's greed. Maya's phone had exactly one voicemail from Victoria herself. Maya, I want you to know there are no hard feelings. You played a game you didn't understand against an opponent you underestimated. Jackson and I will be announcing our engagement next week. The wedding will be featured in Boston Magazine's spring issue. I thought you should hear it from me personally. The message was delivered in Victoria's cultured voice, dripping with false sympathy and genuine satisfaction. She had won completely and wanted Maya to know that her victory would be celebrated publicly, while Maya's defeat would be forgotten by everyone except the people whose lives she had destroyed. That evening, Maya stood in her father's empty house holding an eviction notice. The property would be seized within 30 days to satisfy her legal judgments. Everything Carlos Rodriguez had built through 30 years of honest labor would be lost to pay for his daughter's fabricated crimes. The house where Maya had learned to code, where Diane had studied for medical school, where their father had dreamed of his daughter's success, would belong to Victoria Blackwood's legal victory. Maya opened her father's journal to the entry he had written the night before his heart attack. I am proud of Maya beyond words, but I fear for her. Success in this country makes people like us targets. The higher we climb, the further we can fall. If something happens to me, I pray she remembers that our strength comes not from what we own, but from who we are. The final page contains something Maya had never seen before, a detailed timeline documenting Jackson's behavior over the past year, including dates when he had accessed Maya's computer, specific questions he had asked about Connect Care's operations, and conversations that had seemed innocent at the time, but now revealed a pattern of intelligence gathering. Carlos had recognized the signs of betrayal even when Maya was blind to them. Her father, who had spent 30 years working for wealthy men who saw him as invisible, had understood exactly what was happening to his daughter. He had been trying to protect her, even as the stress of watching her destruction killed him. "My dear Maya," the final entry read, "if you are reading this, then my fears have come true. But remember what I taught you. They can take our money, our reputation, even our lives. They cannot take our truth or our determination. Build something they cannot destroy. Build it for the people they forget." As Maya read her father's words, something shifted inside her chest. For months, she had been fighting Victoria's game by Victoria's rules, trying to prove her innocence in courts and newspapers controlled by people who had already decided her guilt. She had been seeking justice from a system designed to protect wealth and privilege at the expense of people like her. But Carlos Rodriguez hadn't raised his daughter to seek approval from people who despised her existence. He had raised her to serve the vulnerable, to solve problems others ignored, and to fight for justice even when the system was rigged against her. He had taught her that real power came from community, not from institutions. Maya walked to her laptop and began typing. Not a legal brief or a press release, but code. She was building something new, something Victoria couldn't buy or manipulate or destroy with fabricated evidence. Something that would exist outside the traditional power structures that had been weaponized against her. The platform she created over the next 48 hours was simple but powerful. A crowdsourced database where people could report financial fraud, corporate manipulation, and abuse of power by wealthy individuals and institutions. Users could upload evidence, connect with other victims, and organize legal challenges against perpetrators who seemed untouchable. Maya called it Truth Ledger, and she built it with the same passion she had once brought to Connect Care. But this time, she wasn't building for profit or recognition or acceptance into elite circles. She was building for survival, for justice, and for the memory of her father who had taught her that real change came from the bottom up. The first entry in Truth Ledger detailed Victoria Blackwood's complete scheme against Maya. Documented with timestamps, recordings, and digital evidence, Maya had been quietly collecting for months while pretending to be defeated. Within hours of going live, other victims began coming forward. Entrepreneurs whose companies had been destroyed by similar tactics, families whose reputations had been ruined by coordinated attacks, investigators whose careers had been ended for getting too close to the truth. Maya realized she wasn't Victoria's first victim. She was simply the most visible one, the proof of concept for a system designed to maintain economic inequality by destroying anyone who threatened established power structures. And Victoria had made a crucial mistake. She had destroyed Maya so completely that Maya no longer had anything left to lose. The war was entering its final phase, and for the first time, Maya Rodriguez Chen held weapons her enemy couldn't confiscate. The truth, a platform to share it, and an army of victims ready to fight back against the system that had crushed them. Victoria Blackwood was about to learn that sometimes, when you push someone too far, you don't break them. You forge them into something much more dangerous than they ever imagined they could become. 3 weeks after launching Truth Ledger from her father's kitchen table, Maya was working 18-hour days coordinating what had become a full-scale movement for economic justice. The platform had exploded beyond her wildest expectations, attracting thousands of users, sharing stories of corporate fraud, financial manipulation, and abuse by powerful individuals who had seemed untouchable. Maya's father's house had been transformed into an unlikely headquarters for digital revolution. Mrs. Vasquez had converted her basement into a makeshift server room. Mr. Martinez had donated computers from his electronics repair shop. Father Miguel from Sacred Heart Church had organized a network of volunteers to help moderate the platform and verify user submissions. The East Boston community that had embraced Carlos Rodriguez for 30 years now embraced his daughter's fight for justice with the same fierce loyalty. These were people who understood what it meant to be powerless against wealth and privilege, who had seen their own dreams crushed by systems designed to keep them in their place. "Maya, you need to see this immediately," called Elena Santos, a former Connect Care employee who had become Maya's volunteer chief researcher. Elena had lost her job and her health insurance when Connect Care folded, but had refused Victoria's offer of employment at Blackwood Capital, recognizing it for the bribe it was. Elena's laptop displayed a Truth Ledger submission that made Maya's hands shake as she read it. The post was from Jennifer Walsh, a former senior analyst at Blackwood Capital, who had been fired 6 months earlier after questioning Victoria's research methods and refusing to sign off on fabricated investment reports. Victoria Blackwood has been running a systematic scheme to destroy minority-owned businesses across New England for the past 5 years, Jennifer had written. I have copies of internal communications, client lists, financial records, and operational manuals proving she targeted companies owned by women, people of color, and first-generation immigrants. Connect Care was just the highest-profile case in a much larger pattern of economic terrorism. The documents Jennifer uploaded were devastating in their scope and detail. Internal emails showed Victoria explicitly instructing her team to identify successful minority entrepreneurs who threaten established market share and develop comprehensive destruction strategies combining financial warfare, regulatory capture, and reputational assassination. Maya read communications between Victoria and Jackson dating back 18 months, revealing that their affair had begun as part of Victoria's plan to gain inside access to Connect Care's operations. Jackson had been manipulated just as thoroughly as Maya. His insecurities about his trust fund background, exploited by Victoria's promises of authentic success, built on his own merits rather than his family's wealth. The emails showed Victoria systematically destroying Jackson's confidence in Maya's love, convincing him that she was using him for social advancement while planning to discard him once she no longer needed his connections. Victoria had twisted every gesture of Maya's independence into evidence of opportunism, every success into proof that she was outgrowing Jackson. But the most shocking revelation was Victoria's client list, a who's who of Boston's old money families and established corporations who had paid millions to eliminate entrepreneurial competition through coordinated attacks designed to look like market forces and regulatory oversight. The American dream was being systematically murdered by people who already had everything but couldn't tolerate others achieving success. Maya, Elena said quietly, there are 12 other companies Victoria destroyed using the exact same playbook she used against you. Dozens of families wiped out, hundreds of employees left without jobs, thousands of customers left without services they depended on, all to preserve the market dominance of companies owned by Victoria's clients. Maya stared at the evidence, understanding for the first time that her personal tragedy was part of a much larger system designed to preserve economic inequality by destroying anyone who threatened established power structures. This wasn't capitalism, it was economic feudalism disguised as free market competition. We need to go public with this, Maya said, her voice gaining strength for the first time in months. Not through traditional media. They're all controlled by people who benefit from Victoria's system. We need to reach people directly, bypass the gatekeepers who have been protecting her. Over the next week, Maya's team worked around the clock to verify Jennifer's documents and connect them with other Truth Ledger submissions. The pattern was undeniable and horrifying. Victoria Blackwood had weaponized corporate law, regulatory capture, and media manipulation to systematically destroy competition while enriching established interests who paid her millions for the service. Maya decided to release everything at once in a comprehensive report she titled The Blackwood Files: How Boston's Elite Conspired to Destroy the American Dream. The report documented every case, every victim, every fraudulent piece of evidence Victoria had fabricated over 5 years of organized economic warfare against working-class entrepreneurs. But Maya faced the same problem that had destroyed Marcus Washington: how to get the truth to people when the traditional gatekeepers were complicit in the cover-up. Every major media outlet in Boston had financial relationships with Victoria's clients. Every regulatory agency had been captured by the same interests Victoria served. The solution came from an unexpected source. Luis Ramirez, a senior at MIT studying computer science, had grown up in East Boston and remembered Carlos Rodriguez as the man who had employed his father when no one else would hire undocumented workers. Luis had been following Maya's story and offered to help in a way that would change everything. Maya, forget traditional media, Luis said during a late-night strategy session in the converted basement headquarters. My generation gets information from completely different sources. We don't trust newspapers or television news. Give me your report in 48 hours. I'll make sure every college student in New England reads it. Luis and his network of student activists created what they called Operation Sunlight, a coordinated social media campaign that would release Maya's evidence across dozens of platforms simultaneously. They would bypass traditional gatekeepers by going directly to their target audience. Young people who understood economic inequality as an existential threat and had no loyalty to the institutions that protected it. The plan was brilliant in its simplicity. At exactly noon on a Friday, thousands of students would simultaneously post excerpts from the Blackwood Files across every social media platform, using hashtags that would trend instantly and reach millions of people before Victoria's public relations machine could respond. Within hours of Operation Sunlight's launch, Maya's report was trending on every major social media platform. College students shared it with their parents. Young professionals forwarded it to their colleagues. The story spread faster than any traditional media outlet could have achieved, reaching millions of people before Victoria's crisis management team even understood what was happening. The reaction was immediate and devastating for Victoria. Truth Ledger crashed from overwhelming traffic as hundreds of thousands of new users registered to share their own stories of corporate abuse. The hashtag #BlackwoodFiles became a rallying cry for economic justice advocates across the country. Maya watched from her father's kitchen as the movement she had started grew beyond anything she could have imagined. Television news programs were forced to cover the story because it was trending so heavily on social media. Senators began calling for investigations. The Securities and Exchange Commission announced they were reviewing Victoria's activities. For the first time in months, Maya Rodriguez Chen felt something she had almost forgotten. Hope. Not hope for personal vindication, but hope that the system could be changed, that predators like Victoria could be stopped, that the American dream could be protected for future generations of immigrants and entrepreneurs. Victoria Blackwood had tried to destroy Maya by isolating her from power and privilege. But Maya had found something much stronger, a community of people who shared her values and her determination to fight back against a system designed to crush anyone who threatened established interests. The tables were finally turning, and Victoria was about to learn that armies of ordinary people fighting for justice were much more powerful than networks of wealthy elites protecting their privilege. The federal courthouse in Boston had never seen anything like it. Thousands of protesters filled the steps and surrounding streets, holding signs reading "Justice for all victims" and "End corporate terrorism." They had come from across New England and beyond. Entrepreneurs whose companies had been destroyed, families whose reputations had been ruined, workers whose livelihoods had been stolen by Victoria Blackwood's systematic scheme of economic warfare. Maya stood at the center of it all, flanked by Elena Santos and Jennifer Walsh, the whistleblower whose evidence had finally brought Victoria down. She wore a simple black dress that had belonged to her mother and carried her father's rosary in her pocket for strength. This was the moment Carlos Rodriguez had died believing would never come, the day his daughter would see justice served. The crowd was diverse in every way that mattered, young and old, every ethnicity, every economic background. What united them was their shared experience of being targeted by a system designed to preserve inequality through the systematic destruction of anyone who threatened established power structures. Maya Rodriguez Chen, called Sarah Kim, rushing toward her through the crowd. The Justice Department just announced the final charges: conspiracy to commit securities fraud, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, conspiracy to commit murder in the first degree for Marcus Washington's death, racketeering under the RICO Act, and domestic terrorism for her coordinated attacks on minority entrepreneurs. Victoria is facing life in prison without possibility of parole. Maya felt tears in her eyes as she absorbed the news. Marcus Washington's death would finally be investigated as the murder it was. The families destroyed by Victoria's schemes would have their day in court. The system that had enabled corporate predators to destroy honest competition would be exposed and dismantled. Jackson Sterling emerged from the courthouse in handcuffs, flanked by FBI agents and looking like a broken man. The person Maya had once loved appeared to have aged a decade in the months since their aborted wedding. Their eyes met briefly as he was led to a waiting car, And Maya saw genuine remorse in his gaze, but also the hollow understanding that some betrayals could never be forgiven or forgotten. Maya called David Kim, the lawyer who had stood by her when her case seemed hopeless. Jackson just agreed to testify against Victoria in exchange for a reduced sentence. He's providing everything: communications, financial records, audio recordings of Victoria planning Marcus Washington's murder, and testimony about the systematic destruction of minority-owned businesses. The crowd parted as Maya made her way into the courthouse for the hearing that would determine Victoria's fate. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity, with overflow crowds watching on closed-circuit television in adjacent rooms. This was more than a criminal trial. It was a reckoning with a system that had allowed wealth and privilege to weaponize justice against working-class entrepreneurs. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity when Victoria's trial began 3 months later. Maya testified for 2 full days, recounting the systematic destruction of her company, her family, and her father's legacy. But she wasn't the only victim to take the stand. 12 other entrepreneurs told similar stories: promising companies destroyed by fabricated evidence, families bankrupted by fraudulent lawsuits, careers ended by coordinated character assassination campaigns. The pattern was undeniable, the evidence overwhelming, and the human cost devastating. Victoria's defense team, the most expensive legal talent money could buy, argued that she was simply an aggressive competitor operating within legal boundaries. They painted her as a successful businesswoman being persecuted for her success, a victim of reverse discrimination by prosecutors seeking to appease minority activists. But Jackson Sterling's testimony destroyed that narrative completely. Victoria Blackwood orchestrated the murder of Marcus Washington because his investigation threatened to expose her entire operation, Jackson testified, his voice steady despite the weight of his words. She told me Marcus's death had to look like suicide and that no one would investigate too closely because he was African American and had supposedly been caught fabricating evidence. Jackson's voice broke as he continued. She showed me the suicide note she had forged in Marcus's handwriting. She had been planning his murder for weeks, studying his routines, his mental health history, his apartment building security system, everything she needed to make his death believable as suicide. Tyrannon. The prosecution presented audio recordings Jackson had made of Victoria planning other attacks, including detailed discussions of how to fabricate evidence against minority entrepreneurs and coordinate media campaigns to destroy their reputations. The recordings revealed a woman completely without conscience, discussing the destruction of human lives with the same casual tone others might use to plan a dinner party. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Victoria Blackwood was found guilty on all counts: conspiracy, fraud, racketeering, and first-degree murder. The judge sentenced her to life in prison without possibility of parole, plus an additional 50 years for her other crimes. The defendant's crimes represent more than simple financial fraud, Judge Patricia Romano stated during sentencing. This was a systematic attack on the fundamental principles of free enterprise and equal opportunity that define American democracy. Victoria Blackwood didn't just destroy businesses, she attempted to destroy the very idea that talent and determination could triumph over inherited privilege. As Victoria was led away in shackles, Maya felt a complex mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Justice had been served, but it couldn't bring back her father or restore the years of struggle and pain Victoria's scheme had caused. Marcus Washington would never see his vindication. Carlos Rodriguez had died believing his daughter was a criminal. Outside the courthouse, Maya addressed the crowd of supporters who had stood with her throughout the long fight for justice. The speech had been written and rewritten dozens of times, but when the moment came, Maya spoke from her heart. 6 months ago, I thought my story was over, Maya said, her voice carrying clearly in the autumn air. I thought Victoria Blackwood had destroyed everything my family had built over 30 years of honest work. But I learned something important. They can take our companies, our money, even our lives, but they cannot take our truth, our community, or our determination to fight for what's right. Maya looked out at the faces in the crowd. Immigrants who had built businesses from nothing, students who were fighting for economic justice, workers who refused to accept that wealth and privilege placed anyone above the law. These were her people, her true community, and they had stood by her when the systems designed to protect justice had failed. My father, Carlos Rodriguez, came to this country with a toolbox and a dream, Maya continued, her voice gaining strength. He believed America was a place where hard work and honesty could build a better life for his children. Victoria Blackwood tried to prove him wrong. She tried to show that success was reserved for people born into the right families, that the American dream was a lie told to keep working people in their place. The crowd was silent, hanging on every word. But standing here today, surrounded by people who fought for justice when the system failed, I know my father was right. We didn't just defeat Victoria Blackwood. We proved that communities of ordinary people fighting for justice are stronger than networks of wealthy elites protecting their privilege. That's the real American dream, and it's alive and well. The crowd erupted in applause that echoed off the courthouse walls. As people began to disperse, many approached Maya to share their own stories and thank her for giving them hope that justice was still possible in America. Diane approached her sister with tears streaming down her face. Harvard Medical School had not only reinstated her, but had offered her a full scholarship and issued a formal public apology for failing to properly investigate the fabricated evidence against her. The Rodriguez family name had been cleared, their father's memory vindicated. Papa would be so proud, Diane whispered, embracing Maya tightly. Maya looked up at the courthouse steps where she had once stood powerless and broken, facing charges for crimes she hadn't committed. Now she stood as the leader of a movement that had fundamentally changed how America understood the relationship between wealth, power, and justice. The war was over. Victoria Blackwood would spend the rest of her life in prison. Jackson Sterling had received a reduced sentence in exchange for his cooperation, but would never again be trusted in Boston's business community. And Maya Rodriguez Chen had won not just for herself, but for everyone who believed that truth and determination could still triumph over money and privilege in America. But even as she celebrated this victory, Maya knew the real work was just beginning. One predator had been stopped, but the system that had enabled Victoria's crimes was still in place, ready to protect the next wealthy sociopath who decided to destroy working-class entrepreneurs for threatening established interests. Maya had found her life's mission, building systems that would protect future generations from the kind of destruction she had survived. The little girl who had learned to code on her father's second-hand laptop was about to change how America protected its dreamers from those who would destroy them for daring to succeed. 2 years after Victoria Blackwood's conviction, Maya Rodriguez Chen stood before a joint session of Congress, invited to testify about corporate accountability and economic justice. The woman addressing the nation's lawmakers bore little resemblance to the broken entrepreneur who had once sat powerless in a bankruptcy court, watching her life's work crumble based on fabricated evidence. Maya's new company, Truth Ledger Industries, had evolved far beyond its origins as a crowdsourced fraud reporting platform. It was now a comprehensive suite of tools designed to help entrepreneurs, workers, and communities protect themselves against corporate abuse, offering everything from document verification services to legal aid coordination to crisis response support. The company employed over 800 people across 12 states and had helped expose dozens of financial fraud schemes, prevented countless small businesses from being destroyed by coordinated attacks, and connected thousands of victims of corporate abuse with the resources they needed to fight back. Honorable senators and representatives, Maya began, her voice confident and clear as it carried through the packed chamber. 2 years ago, I learned firsthand how sophisticated criminal networks can weaponize our legal and financial systems against honest entrepreneurs. Today, I want to share what we've learned about protecting the American dream from those who would corrupt it for personal gain. Maya's testimony detailed specific policy recommendations born from her harrowing experience with Victoria's systematic destruction campaign. Stronger penalties for corporate fraud that included mandatory prison time for executives, enhanced whistleblower protections for employees who expose illegal schemes, and technological tools to help small businesses and entrepreneurs verify the authenticity of legal documents and media reports. She spoke about the need for federal legislation to combat economic terrorism, the coordinated use of legal and financial systems to destroy legitimate businesses for competitive advantage. She outlined how artificial intelligence could be used to detect patterns of fraudulent attacks before they destroyed their targets. But her most powerful moment came when she spoke about personal resilience and community support, as the ultimate weapons against predators who weaponized wealth and privilege. The greatest protection against economic predators isn't law enforcement or regulation, though both are essential, Maya said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had survived the worst and emerged stronger. It's communities of people who refuse to abandon each other when powerful interests try to divide and conquer us. After her testimony, Maya walked through the Capitol building to a private meeting with Senator Elizabeth Warren, who had become a champion of Maya's cause and was sponsoring legislation inspired by the Blackwood case. They discussed comprehensive reforms that would create new federal protections for entrepreneurs targeted by coordinated financial attacks. Maya, your story has fundamentally changed how we think about economic violence in America, Senator Warren said as they sat in her office overlooking the National Mall. You've shown that what happened to you wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a systematic effort to preserve inequality by destroying anyone who threatens established power structures. That evening, Maya returned to Boston for the grand opening of the Carlos Rodriguez Center for Entrepreneurial Justice, a nonprofit organization she had founded in her father's memory, using the settlement money from her lawsuit against Victoria's network of co-conspirators. The center provided legal support, financial resources, and community networks for entrepreneurs from underrepresented backgrounds who face coordinated attacks on their businesses. It operated on a simple principle Carlos had taught his daughter. Real change happened when communities protected each other against predators who hid behind wealth and respectability. The opening ceremony was held at the restored Connect Care building, which Maya had purchased and renovated as the center's headquarters. The same conference room where Victoria's fraud had once destroyed Maya's company now housed a legal aid clinic staffed by volunteer attorneys who specialized in corporate accountability cases. Diane Rodriguez Chen, now Dr. Diane Rodriguez Chen, served as the center's medical director, providing healthcare services to entrepreneurs and their families while they fought legal battles against corporate predators. She had graduated first in her class from Harvard Medical School and had been accepted to a prestigious residency program in emergency medicine, but had chosen to dedicate her career to serving the community that had supported her family through their darkest hours. Maya, Diane said during her speech at the opening ceremony, her voice filled with pride and love. Papa always said that success was measured not by what you accumulated, but by what you contributed to making the world more just. You have contributed justice, hope, and proof that ordinary people can defeat extraordinary corruption when they refuse to surrender their truth. The ceremony was attended by hundreds of people whose lives had been touched by Maya's fight for justice. Entrepreneurs who had been saved from destruction by Truth Ledger's early warning systems, students who had been inspired to pursue social justice careers, families who had found hope in their darkest moments through the community Maya had built. As the evening concluded, Maya walked alone through the center's halls, pausing at a memorial wall dedicated to victims of corporate fraud. Marcus Washington's photograph held a place of honor, along with dozens of other entrepreneurs, journalists, and activists who had paid the ultimate price for challenging entrenched power. Maya's phone buzzed with a notification from Truth Ledger's monitoring system. Another entrepreneur was under attack, this time in Seattle, using methods similar to Victoria's playbook, but adapted for the tech industry. Maya smiled grimly as she forwarded the alert to her response team. They had been preparing for this fight their entire organizational life. A text message followed from Amanda Foster, the Seattle entrepreneur. Ms. Rodriguez Chen, my name is Amanda Foster. I'm a software engineer whose company is being attacked using methods identical to those Victoria Blackwood used against you. I've documented everything and uploaded it to Truth Ledger. Can you help us fight back? Maya typed her response immediately. Amanda, you're not alone. We've been preparing for this fight our entire lives. Our Seattle team will be in touch within the hour. Together, we're going to stop them. Walking to her car, Maya paused to look up at the Boston skyline that had once represented everything she thought she wanted. Acceptance from the elite, integration into established power structures, validation from people who valued wealth over character. Now she understood that real success meant something entirely different. Building systems that protected the vulnerable, creating communities that supported each other against predators, and proving that truth and determination could still triumph over money and privilege in America when people stood together. Maya Rodriguez Chen had lost everything Victoria Blackwood had tried to take from her. Her original company, her naive faith in institutional justice, her father's life, her sister's initial dreams. But in fighting back, she had found something much more valuable, a purpose larger than personal success, a community stronger than individual achievement, and a legacy that would protect countless others from the kind of destruction she had survived. Carlos Rodriguez's daughter had fulfilled his greatest dream. She had built something that truly mattered, something that made the world more just, and something that honored the sacrifices of everyone who had fought for the American promise that hard work and honesty could still build a better life. The little girl who had once coded games on her father's old laptop had become a woman who coded justice into the American system itself, and that code would run long after Maya Rodriguez Chen herself was gone, protecting dreamers and builders and believers from those who would destroy them for daring to succeed. Maya had risen from the ashes of her destruction, not just as a survivor, but as a phoenix whose fire would light the way for countless others, facing their own battles against impossible odds. Victoria Blackwood had tried to prove that the American dream was a lie. Instead, she had proven that it was strong enough to survive even the most sophisticated attempts to destroy it. The Rodriguez family's American dream lived on, transformed but unbroken, in every entrepreneur who refused to surrender, every community that protected its dreamers, and every person who chose truth over power in the eternal struggle for justice. If this story gripped you from the first sentence, imagine what the next hour will bring. Hit that like button if you're ready for a tale of betrayal, revenge, and ultimate justice. Drop a comment telling me what you think Maya should have done differently. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell, because stories like this one will change how you see power, privilege, and the real cost of success in America. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next.